In early October 2023, the Formula One circus travelled to the Middle East for the Qatar Grand Prix. A combination of wickedly fast corners, extreme heat, and the teams being told by Pirelli that they couldn't run the tyres for more than 18 laps meant this already difficult race became a series of flat-out sprints. Williams driver Logan Sargent pulled out of the race due to heat exhaustion. Some drivers struggled to get out of their cars at the end of the race. It was clearly on the limit of what the drivers could cope with. This was largely down to the effect of the heat on the body when enduring sustained G-forces. Cooler conditions would likely not have been as bad. But it got us thinking though, what is the limit of the human body in a race car? Has there ever been a race where it was physically impossible for the drivers to compete? Well, there was, at the brilliantly named Firestone Firehawk 600 at the Texas Motor Speedway in April 2001. Back in the late 90s and early 2000s, there were two open-wheel race series in the US, the Indy Racing League, or IRL, and Championship Auto Racing Teams, or CART. The IRL cars only ran on ovals and produced around 700 horsepower. The CART cars ran on a mixture of ovals, road and street courses and produced around 900 horsepower. IRL cars tended to be slower than the CART cars, and at somewhere like the Indianapolis Motor Speedway would average around 225 miles an hour a lap. The CART series didn't run at Indy at that time, but one did set the closed course speed record of 241 mile an hour at Fontana. The Texas Motor Speedway was a different kettle of fish to the usual super speedways though. This was a 1.5 mile high banked oval with an inclination of between 22 and 24 degrees in the corners, and it really wasn't built for Indy cars. The IRL cars did run there and they set some incredible speeds, initially 227, but they then, quite sensibly as it turned out, trimmed them back to around 215 mile an hour. For a 1.5 mile oval, that was seriously quick. CART made an inquiry with the track owners about whether they could also run at Texas. The main concern was whether the CART cars would be too quick for the circuit, so a test was arranged in 2000 for Ray Hall driver Kenny Brack. Brack ran 100 laps without issue and hit a 221 mile an hour average. There was a rumour that Brack's car had been dialed down a little for the test though. Some other CART teams then tested in early 2001 and reported two things of note. One, that the cars could run completely flat out for the whole lap, and two, the drivers were experiencing some very high G-forces. Driver Mauricio Gugelmin did express some concerns about safety, saying, in his opinion, the track was too small for such sustained high speeds, and also that the surface was very bumpy. Some CART officials, including the series Dr. Steve Olvey, echoed Gugelmin's sentiments, but it was agreed that the race would go ahead. When they arrived for first practice, they didn't see speeds in the 221 mile an hour range. They saw speeds of over 233. One car even hit a top speed of 238 at the end of the short back straight. In the afternoon practice, the problems started. One of the initial doubters of the race, Mauricio Gugelmin, crashed hard, as did Cristiano D'Amata. In Gugelmin's case, there was a recorded first impact of 66 G, then a secondary impact of 113 G. Ominously, both Gugelmin and D'Amata had no idea why they crashed, and nothing showed up on the telemetry. The cars just hit the wall. Drivers were reporting how amazing the circuit was though. Bruno Junqueira said it was the fastest track he'd ever driven on. Nicolas Manassian called it a roller coaster. Helio Castroneves called it physical. Dario Franchitti said, "You can feel your blood draining to the bottom of your legs because it's a different G-force than we're used to. We're used to side forces, but the banking is so steep here that the forces are coming in from the top of your head." Roberto Moreno said, "In the middle of the corner, you can actually feel your blood and organs go to one side." Then, some unsettling stories started to filter through. Max Papis reported to be disorientated when running at sustained speeds north of 230. So much so, he didn't even know what part of the track he was on. Alex Zanardi and Adrian Fernandez both experienced dizziness and a lack of spatial awareness, including tunnel vision. There was even a story of an unnamed driver getting out of his car and walking into the middle of the pit lane rather than the pit wall. A team member had to run after him and turn him around. By Saturday morning practice, the speeds were continuing to increase. The circuit was rubbering in, the teams were trimming their cars out, and Paul Tracy ran a 236-mile-an-hour lap. To put that into perspective, 236 is the same speed as the quickest lap ever run at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, which is a full mile longer. The teams had also fully assessed the G loadings on the drivers. Tracy's data showed he was pulling 3.5 G vertically and 5.5 G laterally for a sustained period. They were hitting serious Gs for up to 18 seconds of a 21-second lap. This was unprecedented in a race car. After qualifying, Patrick Carpentier commented to Dr. Steve Olvey that he couldn't walk straight for 5 minutes after his run. Helio Castroneves and Tony Kanaan said they felt at the time they were driving upside down. G-forces are pretty well understood as a concept. At rest, a body is experiencing a force of 1 G from the Earth's gravity. Begin to accelerate that body and the force increases. At 2 G, that body effectively weighs twice what it did at rest. At in excess of 230 miles an hour around the high-banked oval of Texas, pulling 5.5 G, your average driver weighed more than 400 kilos. His head alone weighed nearly 30 instead of the usual 5. You can imagine the strain on their necks. Normal humans pass out at this sort of level. It was brutal. Dr. Olvey started to get concerned and contacted a G-force expert and NASA flight director by the name of Dr. Richard Jennings. When Jennings saw the G-force data, he told Olvey, "You're in big trouble." He said there's no scientific literature which studied the effects of such sustained lateral and vertical G-forces on the human body. Dr. Olvey hurriedly called a driver's meeting and asked if anyone had experienced any form of dizziness, disorientation, tunnel vision, nausea or vertigo. Initially only a few hands went up, then a few more, and then nearly all of them raised their hands. One driver admitted to losing awareness between turns and thought he was having a stroke. What the drivers were experiencing is what fighter pilots call G-lock, which is caused by a momentary lack of blood flow to the brain. This is why fighter pilots wear G-suits, where inflatable bladders compresses their legs and abdomen to restrict the blood flow away from the brain. Dr. Jennings and Dr. Olvey calculated that the effects of G-lock were coming in at 229 miles an hour. Crucially, this was 2 miles an hour quicker than the fastest ever IRL lap and quicker than the kart cars had done in testing before the event. Some ideas were put forward for slowing the cars down, including reducing the engine revs. The engine builders weren't happy and said this could cause failures due to unbalanced frequency issues when running the engines at lower than optimum speeds. There was no other alternative than to cancel the race. The drivers were unanimous in their support, except for Paul Tracy and Swedish driver Kenny Brack, who had happened to have put it on pole. Once the announcement was made to cancel the event, Michael Andretti said, "In my 20 years in auto racing, I've never experienced what I was experiencing out there this weekend. The G-forces that were put on our body were way beyond what I could have imagined." Dr. Olvey was soon contacted by NASA and the Pentagon, who wanted to see the data from Texas. They were experimenting with prototype aircraft, which maneuvered so abruptly they wanted to know if humans could actually fly them. Something NASA and the Pentagon also helped to validate was that if the race had gone ahead, all the drivers would have suffered temporary blindness in their left eye very early in the race, and many would have suffered from tunnel vision, dizziness, and disorientation. The tests also confirmed something else which had been on Dr. Olvey's mind. The practice crashes experienced by Gugelmin and D'Amata were likely caused by the G-forces impacting their inner ears. This phenomenon led the drivers to believe they were in a slide when the car wasn't actually sliding at all. Correcting the imaginary slide meant they had simply driven their cars into the wall at 230 miles an hour. Olvey also said that if Gugelmin hadn't been wearing the newly introduced head and neck safety or HANS device, his crash would likely have been fatal. The cancelled event cost CART around $3 million, but if it had gone ahead, who knows what the impact would have been on motorsport.